diversification that we're talking about can happen. Um, there's been growing attention on these sites, both from nonprofits and communities that are hosting these coal plants, utilities that have owned coal plants, but also government. And we're seeing an increase in sort of funding programs from the federal government, from state governments, with an interest in making use of this infrastructure. And that's sort of, I think, a recognition of these sites as potential opportunities. There's also a lot of complexity about these sites. There is pollution, and sometimes there are brownfields, and there's remediation that's necessary. There are some complex financial untanglings that need to happen between the former owners and potentially future owners. And so there are challenges and costs associated with locating new activities at a coal plant that are worth keeping in mind as we grapple with new ways to make use of these sites. And then there's also really an importance and a goal in ensuring that the community and workers have a say in the process for what happens here. And that's a big focus for this discussion too. And so our goal for today with this group is to talk about the things that ReImagine Appalachia and partners can do in the next year to move this work forward. And I'll cover what I mean by this work and sort of the work that ReImagine Appalachia has been doing as sort of context setting for this conversation before turning over to the group. The scope here is thinking about shuttered coal plants really as potential sites for manufacturing hubs in Appalachia. And again, that seeing that as an opportunity to make use of some of the unique physical infrastructure that's present at a shuttered coal plant. And in terms of action plan, we want to be able to think about what sort of resources and connections are helpful for community leaders, for others locally, to gain access to and to know about as they think about ways to influence the use of a coal plant and shape what happens at these sites. Now, this is sort of a big task, coming up with an action plan for an organization for a year's worth of work. And so we're not going to answer everything here, but the idea is to have some conversation, and we'll record this and sort of surface ideas and notice places where there's consensus or disagreement or areas of energy in the conversation that are worth following up on. And this will be really helpful for ReImagine Appalachia and partners, and I think hopefully many of the folks here in thinking about how to engage in this topic going forward. So ReImagine Appalachia has been really thinking about reimagining shuttered coal plants and the work that they're doing in three categories. And the first is developing a handbook. So pulling together information about coal plants and what can be done at these sites and making it accessible to communities and other groups that want to engage in this topic. The second is forming a network of experts to think about some of the complexities and opportunities associated with these sites and having conversations on topics like community visioning processes, developing data-driven tools that can provide key information about sites, characterizing sites within the Ohio River Valley and beyond, thinking about community land trusts and different sort of financial structuring opportunities for bringing community voice into what happens at these sites. And ReImagine Appalachia has helped with RMI to convene a monthly working group to kind of share ideas and discuss some of the emerging topics. And this is something that is open. And so please feel free to follow up with Amanda or myself, and I can drop my email if you're interested in participating in these ongoing chats. And third is forming a community of practice and trying to link some of the ideas out there from the government, from nonprofits, from other people from companies, people who are thinking a lot about what to do at these sites with communities that host them and have sort of exchange of ideas and move that into action and practice of starting to turn shuttered sites into manufacturing and other opportunities. And I think this is something that is a goal that hasn't happened so much yet from the work that we've been doing with ReImagine Appalachia. And so we're really kind of with this space inviting ideas about how to start that work. And so with the work going forward, ReImagine Appalachia this year has an intention and we'll be thinking about how to gather and host resources and also create resources that are helpful for communities and thinking about transforming shuttered coal plants. We're thinking about using a network, building and using expertise from many people who are thinking about this issue, and being able to form a community of practice that can share ideas and capacities in order to support communities and both imagining and also acting on ideas for what can happen at these sites. So our mission today as a group is, I think, to be somewhat aspirational and think about these objectives of reimagining shuttered coal plants from liabilities into places, into manufacturing hubs, places of opportunity. And it's also somewhat open-ended. I know many people have been in conversation with each other probably in this group, but you might be bringing ideas that are new to others. And so please feel free to share the ideas that you have, the work that you're doing, because I think people will find it new, even if it's something you've been focused on for some time. So examples are great. We want to know about the practice of your work. We want to know about ideas that you have. For this discussion, the format I have in mind is to have discussion on kind of three categories of thinking. The first is thinking about resources. What are the materials that can be written materials, that can be webinars, that can be conferences? What are the resources, the ways of capturing information that are really going to be helpful? The second are connections. What are the partnerships? What are the interactions that are going to be really helpful in transferring information? And the third is sort of feedback and ideas about the way that ReImagine Appalachia is approaching their work in terms of thinking about resources, a network of experts, and a community of practice. What's feedback you have? What seems clear about that, and what seems less clear? What are suggestions you have for how we can think about forming an action plan for this year? So I'll provide a series of prompts, and then I'm going to invite the group to take a couple of minutes to journal. So if you have a pen and paper handy, that's great. You might be journaling on your computer, but I'll give a couple of minutes to sort of step back, reflect on the prompt, jot down some ideas for yourself. And then after a minute or two, I'll kind of open to the group to voice ideas, and you can introduce a new idea, you can respond to something that's been said. Please raise your hand. We have a pretty big group here. So I'll look for people who are raising their hands in the chat, and you can do that using the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen on this page. So I'll call on folks and kind of move us through this conversation. Again, we'll be taking notes, and the session is recorded. We only have an hour, and so I think time will be somewhat limited. So please be cognizant of sort of the space that you're taking in the conversation. And if you aren't able to speak or respond to a prompt, if we run out of time, feel free to put your ideas in the chat. Rika, as we're getting started, do you have a clarifying question before we begin to kick off?
I actually, you had the question about how to facilitate informational material, or how we could gather ideas. And so I had an idea there, which is probably the hardest to pull off, but it would be great for me to visit a plant to actually see what we're all talking about. So that would be my idea there. And that's all.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. It's helpful to see sometimes the sites in person. That can inspire ideas. And organizing visits is a great thought. I'm thinking, so I'd like to move us through these kind of three categories with the discussion. The first will be thinking about resources. The second will be thinking about connections. And the third is about thinking about a whole sort of scope, the places where ReImagine Appalachia can kind of focus attention with partners over the next year. And so for the first category, resources, ReImagine Appalachia is imagining creating an online repository of resources that communities and others will need in order to participate meaningfully in the process of redeveloping shuttered coal plants, and imagining how to create a manufacturing hub or other sort of sites of activity that are beneficial to the host communities. And so the prompt is that I'm thinking about now is, what information do you want to be sort of included in this resource so that you can share it with communities? So if you're imagining a resource that you can share with partners, communities directly, what must be included there? And you might have specific ideas, or you might have ideas for resources that already exist. You might have ideas for resources that you wish existed but don't. And I think both are pretty important here. But as you're considering this resource that you would like to share, keep in mind sort of who needs it. How can kind of multiple resources exist? I know the government has published resources about shuttered coal plants. There's a lot of research from many organizations. How can these different ideas interface and be packaged in a way that's useful for a community that's thinking about a coal plant that it hosts? You can reflect on ideas of what it means for sort of a resource that can be shared to be useful. This is fairly open-ended, but going back to what is the information that you would want to be collected in a resource that ReImagine Appalachia can help create and folks here might be able to share with communities or with people engaged in this idea of transforming shuttered coal plants. So again, feel free to turn your video off for a minute or two, take some time to journal, and then I'll call everyone back and to start beginning to share ideas. Right. Feel free to keep on journaling, but if you are ready to share out, please raise your hand and I will call on folks to go around the room. Yes, Tina.
I'll be honest, I live in an area where the Homer City power plant closed this summer, and it has been entirely privatized. We know nothing about what's going on. It's been a complete communications blackout. So I can't even, the only thing I have heard is that there will be an announcement about a new owner sometime in the first quarter of this year. There's been nothing. So I couldn't even, I don't even know if I belong in this because I can't, it's been a complete blackout. So, yeah. So I don't know what you do about that or if this is the right place, but I'm frustrated, which is why I'm here.
I think that's a really important and helpful starting point, that there's missing information sometimes from the people who own the assets or who the assets are being transferred to, or local government. And there can be places where resources come in to provide some information. Some will be private, but I'm curious if anyone has a response to Tina or thoughts about that prompt, which I think is actually a great way to start this conversation. Sometimes there's a lot of missing information and it's hard to know where to start. Yes, Scott, and then Kathy Ann.
Well, hi, Tina. I grew up in Indiana, PA, so um, yeah, it is a combination of things. When you look at the local government, who has control, uh, the private companies, who has ownership. I think from a starting point, from a collaborative starting point, is get a better understanding of where the shuttered coal plants are, some type of map, anticipated, get an idea of in the next 5 years expected shuttered plants. Try to get a better idea of who has ownership of those properties and locations. Not only the southwestern Pennsylvania here, the Port of Pittsburgh Commission represents 13 counties in southwestern Pennsylvania, including Indiana County. bit also, you look at what's happened with the power plant on Cheswick along the rivers. Our concerns related to the transportation of freight on our rivers and the impact that coal-fired plants that are closed down, that decreases the amount of freight that moves on our rivers, which impacts the funding that we get through the Army Corps of Engineers to operate our locks and dams, which impacts the entire global circular economy related to the movement of freight. So for this particular, just getting a better idea of all these locations, who has ownership, who is the point of contact, and putting a good list together of all that throughout, I would believe that would be a helpful starting point.
Thank you, Scott. Kathy, over to you, and then I see Christine's hand up next.
Sure, thanks. This is Kathy Kowalski. I'm a journalist reporting for Energy News Network. One of the things that would be helpful for me in my reporting would be to know not just what Scott talked about in terms of where facilities are, but also to what extent they've already been remediated or cleaned up, because there are a variety of hazardous waste and Superfund waste that are linked to abandoned power plant sites. And so knowing, what kind of liability a future use might face coming in, what funds might be available, and also then being able to track projects as they're getting up and going. So some sort of like general, map or something similar to maybe the PUCO's solar project map, where you can look at a map and say, oh, what's this project doing? What's that doing? That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Christine, and then Jared, I see your hand.
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Christine Mondor, and I'm principal at a design firm called Evolve Environment Architecture. We're located in Pittsburgh, but we work across the regions and around the country, and have had the opportunity to actually work on designing an aluminum plant for Alcoa with the thought of disassembly. So I'm somewhat familiar with the difficulties of taking plants offline from a proactive sense. But your question about like what resources are needed, I think for me, in the community development work we do, the assumption that information yields action is not always true. And so you can have the best database, and I think that everything that everybody said so far is absolutely spot on what the information is we need. But the truth is we need to know what the actors' roles are. And if that means that the PUC or Port of Pittsburgh or some state agency in this region has a master plan and has this data, that's a great start. But the problem that we see often is that information and even these programs then come down to these small municipalities or cities that lack the capacity to redevelop an affordable housing project, let alone a huge site, and that there's no capacity for seeing this longitudinal, decades plus long project through. And so resources are one thing. What we really need is like a community development corporation, a CDC, if you will, who goes up and down the river or wherever it might be, dealing with these issues again and again and again. Maybe it's a for-profit, maybe it's a nonprofit, but somebody who understands how these processes work, crosses state boundaries, and can use this information on behalf of communities and with communities, because I'm always concerned that the ultimate burden falls on municipalities who have so many burdens already. There's just no capacity to take on the scale of a project like this.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. Jared, and then I see William's hand up.
Thanks, Sam. Just quick, I second everything that's been said so far, and I definitely agree with Christine. Hopefully that's where our conversation's going, trusting the process that we're just starting with resources as kind of a baseline. And I think what was mentioned before about community actors having a better ability to know what's going on those sites so as to potentially intervene. One thing that has kind of been raised in my research that I've thought about is this pipeline process of private entities working with a local economic development authority to apply for a federal or state grant as maybe an opportunity. Since, you know, obviously any grant award is going to be public. Somebody smarter than me might know when an application is private versus public, but it seems like that's baseline information that we've got to be able to track and pull into some of these other resources that are already available, like the maps, you know, and finding out who the owners are, is knowing when those private entities are seeking public funding, because I think that's what creates circumstance and a sort of moral ground for community activists to come together and assert themselves into the process.
Thank you, Jared. And you're right, that is where the conversation will be going next, into thinking about connections. William, I see your hand up.
Hi, everybody. Dr. Bill Paolillo. I also have my colleague on here, Dr. Ben Cross. And so I'm an electrician by day, right? So we connect wires, a very large electrician, part of Quanta Services, $25 billion. There's a project right now in Appalachia, down in Piketon, Ohio, that I believe is a good model, right? So it's a DOE site. And we're going to put on there, we're in the process of a DOE application, a loan application, that will have a $1.5 billion facility. It's an integrated manufacturing facility that will go and manufacture 500 metric tons of clean hydrogen that will power clean ammonia, 1,200 metric tons, and 100 metric tons of silicon, right? So you have an integrated manufacturing site. You're looking for a clean innovation ecosystem, all right? That's kind of like a hub, if you will. And we have the blueprint down there, all right? Now, I'm the electrician, okay, on this job, if you will, and helper to go and do it. Dr. Ben Cross, okay, was actually, he wrote the first, I guess the first knowledge about how to create integrated manufacturing facilities, okay? It was a part of the EATER project way back in the day. So Ben, why don't you talk a little bit about it as well? Because you know, so I'm saying we're looking for resources. I would suggest that the information's out there and they've got all the pieces and parts laid out. We wrote an academic paper that we're still in the process of getting published with The Economist. So I think that the stuff's there, but Ben, why don't you jump in?
Ben, you might be on mute. I'm having
I got to turn my microphone on as well. I did the one on the computer, but not the microphone itself. Sorry about that. Thank you, Dr. Bill. Dr. Bill and I talk about every day, and that's about clean, innovative energy ecosystems, and really about closed loop manufacturing. And that's really what in Portsmouth, what we're looking about is integrated energy system, closed loop manufacturing complex, which is really coupling energy systems and manufacturing together to achieve sustainability. That's applying circular economy concepts, which is, I was almost torn to go to the other breakout sections on circular economy piece, but I think it applies very much at these particular sites. And one of the key things that you have to do is really what you're talking about, Sam, is an asset assessment that has to be done. Then you have to create a GIS database to capture what those assets are. And then you need a group, as I think Catherine or Christine was talking about, that can actually take that information and start getting it out to people who can capture the vision of where this needs to head and how to best utilize those particular set of assets that are available there. But just sort of talking about them will never get you there, because you have to sort of put them on paper, put them on a GIS database, because it gets very complex very quickly. And so you can understand what assets you have available that you can capitalize on. And the last thing I'll say about as far as coal-fired power plants, most of the time you hear people talking about turning coal plants, turn them in just megawatts to megawatts. We really want to do what I think you're alluding to, Sam, is megawatts to mega products. There's a lot more that can be done at these particular sites than just produce electricity. There can be great places for manufacturing to take place where the assets are already there, the infrastructure that's already available. But you have to really first do that assessment of what assets that you have, and then you got to capture what those assets are. And then you can start putting together the vision that you want for that particular location.
So build on what Ben talked about there as far as assets go. So to do that facility that we're talking about, we probably have to flow, we're still working through the analysis, 20 to 40 rail cars a day, all right, what we're manufacturing. And there's just terrific assets, you know, obviously there's power lines and things like that, but there's good rail assets, right? And so those are the types of things that these coal, where these coal plants were, they have all this sort of good stuff. And you just got to figure it out, right? And it becomes very, very favorable for developers to participate in this because, when you put in, the big electrical services and the rail lines, that's money people don't want to spend. And you wouldn't be able to afford the project if you did have to spend it, right? So that's, redoing and reusing those assets are a big, big deal.
One
Thank
thing,
you,
if I
Bill, and
could
thank you,
add,
Ben. Yeah,
one of the
maybe
areas
Ben,
you want to
last
look at,
comment, and then we'll move on to the next prompt.
Sam,
but
if I could just
please.
comment as well, you really got to look at, when you're looking at these coal plants to be resurfaced, is really energy intensive industries. That's the ones you got to look at that can really utilize those assets the best. And then there's all kinds of add-ons that you can do to help develop your revenue streams for a lot of other areas.
Yeah, these are great points. And one, I'm hearing a couple of themes here. One is there are resources out there that are helpful for both thinking about what you can do with a particular site, learn about the characteristics of that site, as well as think through the steps or actions that need to happen in terms of acting on the opportunity and transforming a shuttered coal plant to a next productive purpose. There are probably also gaps, both in terms of the resources that are available, as well as access to those resources or knowledge about those resources, and room for both getting resources and doing a better job about getting resources into the hands or accessible to people who want to make use of them. And then finally, the connection piece is really important. And this is to Christine's point and Jared's point. The resources on their own aren't enough. Work needs to be done in order to form connections, build capacity among community groups, among asset owners, among the many parties that need to be involved in figuring out how to transform an asset and make sure that it can be acted upon. And so in sort of thinking about connection, our second prompt is, what is a conversation or a collaboration or a partnership that you would like to see that you think would support communities in sort of shaping both ideas about the uses at a shuttered coal plant, perhaps acting on and implementing those ideas and getting them built. So it can be both in terms of visioning. It can also be in terms of actually the transforming a coal plant. But what are the connections? What are the collaborations and partnerships that are necessary in order to turn these resources into actions? So again, take a minute or two, do some journaling, and I'll call the group back. Right. So if you start to, feel free to keep journaling, but if you are ready to share, please raise your hand and I can call on folks. Again, if you have sort of personal experiences with forming connections or wish that a connection existed that doesn't, these are all important to add to this conversation. So as you're ready, please feel free to put your hand up and I will call on folks. Catherine, yes.
Hi, everybody. So I just wanted to sort of, share a resource or a connection that I want to make sure everyone's aware of. have you all heard of like your EPA tab provider, your technical assistance to brownfields provider? Is that a phrase that has? No? Okay. I'm seeing shaking heads, so I'm gonna assume that this is new, which is good. This is exciting. So I'm with the Brownfield Center at Marshall University, but our friends at WVU, our sister office up there, is the lead for the Technical Assistance to Brownfields project for EPA Region 3, which is like West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, that area. There are tab providers for the rest of, all the other EPA regions. But we do a lot of just technical assistance for projects that are, redeveloping old abandoned properties, brownfields properties. So I would say arguably that, abandoned or, out of decommissioned, I guess, coal plants can fall under that as well. So there's a lot that our folks can help you with. We have a little bit of experience with specifically mine land, but we can help a lot with even just like site reuse planning, environmental site assessments, all those sorts of things. So I'm going to drop some links in the chat, but I wanted to make sure that folks have access to that resource, and we have a lot of different information, and it's completely free technical assistance through the US EPA. I'm not, obviously I'm not volunteering right my team. I don't want to get calls from Carrie Staten at WVU. You volunteered us for everything, but I wanted to make sure you have access to that resource.
Thank you, Catherine. Other ideas? What are the models of connection that folks have seen that have been particularly successful or worked less well? That could be another way of thinking about this. So you're imagining all the resources that are being created or need to be created. How can those be shared in a way where people who are interested in the information or could potentially make use of the information, how can they get access? What are the partnerships or collaborations that would allow that to happen?
Hey, Sam, I just put in the chat about the Energy Community Alliance, which is based in Washington, D.C., which originally was set up to help repurpose the Department of Energy's former sites that they want to be shut down, like the one we're trying to do at Piketon, Ohio. But they're really now going much broader to all different, like repurposing coal plants and repurposing other energy, especially any sites of energy community where they were dependent on energy. So that alliance is having various different forums and meetings that can help educate you on how to build those kind of partnerships and make those kind of alliances. But it's a nonprofit alliance, and that I gave you that website right in there as well.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for sharing the link.
So
Jared.
just add a quick thought here. I mean, I think what, Tina, the way that you came into this conversation to me feels like an easy kind of step one access point as well. Of if there's a website or a hub on the ReImagine Appalachia website where community members who are concerned about what might be happening, or how they can contribute to a positive vision for a shuttering coal plant, just being able to raise their hand and get connected to others in their community, like that seems like a service that could be provided unless that exists somewhere else that we're not aware of. So that folks can start meeting up regularly and talking about and sort of addressing these things for their own location. And then I also am aware of a couple of accelerators kind of on the environmental justice or community benefits front. Just Transition Fund last year put out a call for applications for accelerators to bring communities together and do that kind of work. So there's also Justice 40 Accelerator is another one I know of. So those would be places I would think to kind of invite that sort of interested community members who are interested in sort of sharing their progress as they prepare to, play that community advocate role in a redeveloping coal plant scenario.
Thank you, Jared. Maybe to echo your prompt, ReImagine Appalachia is looking to build out a resource that can pull together lots of information and make accessible in a single place a lot of the existing resources that could be helpful for community members interested in engaging on these topics. And we haven't seen an example of that aimed in particular at community members, but if folks have seen good examples of those sorts of resources, would love to see links to those. Anyone else, as we think about connection and ways to ensure that the people and organizations that are important in both visioning and implementing ideas for transitioning a shuttered coal plant into a new productive use, what connections need to happen? What partnerships, what conversations? And I see you came off
Sure.
video, but your microphone might
You
be off
eventually
again.
have to get the private sector, somebody who's actually going to be your champion and take your lead. Expecting someone from the government to do that, it's not going to happen. They can help with funding and other things. The community needs the support, but you got to find a private sector person that will take the lead and can go take that vision to make it a reality. So those private public partnerships needs to take place, but that's where you come up with the vision of what you're going to do, and then you got to get a person, an individual, and he can start gaining an organization to put around to go make it happen. That's the only way. It's got to be where they can make money. If it's not something where they can make money, it won't happen either. The rest of it is just a dream. If you want to actually make it happen, it's got to work to where it's going to be financially viable organization that's got to be put together.
Thank you, Ben. So that's thinking through sort of how to pull in private sector interest and engagement in these opportunities. And I see more folks putting links in the chat, which are really helpful. So yes, please continue doing that. I'll give it another 30 seconds in case anyone wants to chime in on connections before moving to our final prompt. So a goal for our time today is to think about the steps in an action plan for ReImagine Appalachia as it considers its work in this area over the next year in gathering resources and creating sort of an online website where people can come to access materials that are useful for kind of understanding the opportunity as well as thinking about acting on ideas that can help turn a shuttered coal plant into a manufacturing hub. Second, continuing to build out the network of experts who are engaged on this topic and engage in this topic from many different angles. I think what we're hearing here is there are lots of ways to engage in thinking about shuttered coal plants. It's a complex, sort of sticky topic. There is engineering expertise needed. There's community knowledge and expertise needed. There's organizing and support from government that's needed in order to really make sure that a plant is transitioned in a way that captures sort of community voice and interests. And then finally, building out a sort of community of practice and really getting at this idea of connection, trying to ensure that the ideas that are being formed and produced and shared through resources have an impact and are sort of brought to the people who can make use of them and need access to that information. And so I think what I would like to invite for this final prompt is as you sort of think about these three action areas that ReImagine Appalachia has presented, what do you see as being especially valuable? And maybe think of that in terms of where do you see yourself engaging? Where do you see these areas being useful to your work or the work of partners? And second, what's missing from this? Is this framework and way of thinking about the work, does that resonate with you? Are there things that you think are gaps or missing from these ideas that ReImagine Appalachia might consider including in their work plan? So again, I'll give a minute or two to journal, and then we'll come back for a discussion. And Bill, I see your hand up, so we can maybe lead off with you when we come back.
Great.
All right, Bill, over to you to start.
Yeah, I'm just gonna cut something here into the chat. And this is from a paper that Ben and I have. And it's not published yet. I'm working with the economist to publish it. And really, if you go into the literature, there's 4 things that have to happen. Okay. And one of the, well, what do we have here? This is interesting. Yeah. So, so in where this will be successful, the things that they've seen is there is a community advisory board set up and a geography funded in a public-private partnership. So if you have those things, that one thing, it's very important, okay? State and local government agencies working together to leverage the federal and private funding, a known and reliable regulatory structure for industrial development, a workforce development program broadly supported in geography, and I would just say a university sponsor, right? So for the Piketon facility, they had, University, Ohio University, if you will. And then we also say there's a 5th where there's a formation of a regional voltage valley business cluster. And this means that you have businesses that support electrification, integrated circuit chips, AI and machine learning, which would be data centers, all right, or anything having to do with electrification. So if you don't have those things, okay, you're most probably not going to be successful, all right? And I don't think as we looked at the literature and everything like that, you really got to have all of them. I think that if everybody was thinking about, like, you're up in Homer City, right? Okay, I'm actually going up there for a family thing in Clymer. Okay, I married a woman from Clymer, and I'm from New York Metro. But anyway, so you need a university, I would think, to kind of spearhead the process, and then they'll get the initial funding, and then they can kind of coordinate these things. At least that's what we've seen down in Piketon, right? And they have a history of doing that over 12 years, and now they're just having success, all right? And we're not even done yet, right? We still have to get the DOE loan. But I think that there's, again, that there's good documented ways to go and do this thing. I would say the first thing you want to go and do is get a university sponsor, because they'll get money for you. And maybe there's different ways to do that, but that's just the way we've seen where it seems to have worked best. So
Yeah.
did I post into the chat yet?
You didn't, and that would be a very helpful link. Thank you for offering that. And some things that I'm sort of hearing, reflecting on our sort of lessons about where transitions to manufacturing sites have been successful are really helpful. And ensuring that some of those connection points happen.
It wants a shorter message. I'm sorry. It's too long. How long can you make the message?
The message, excuse me?
The chat. How long's the chat?
In the chat Zoom? I'm not sure. I'd say if it's not working, you can send it to the ReImagine Appalachia team via email, and we can ensure it's sort of shared out afterwards. But I think that would be.
Yeah, it's fine. I got it. I mean, I'll break it in 2. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And again, I think this is an example of a resource or lessons that are really important and useful to capture and be able to share to folks who might want to make use of them or learn from them. But folks, reflections on sort of the strategy and the areas of attention that ReImagine Appalachia can place on helping communities kind of understand opportunities and get involved with thinking about uses of shuttered coal plants. Jared, yes.
Thanks. Yeah, interested in hearing from more folks as well. But I guess the thing that I'm thinking of listening to this conversation and some of the examples that we're talking about is navigating maybe a spectrum of finance and its intentions, right? At the ReImagine Appalachia Community Benefits Summit in May, we talked about how to ensure that communities benefit from new developments, how to make sure that development is equitable and ecologically responsible. And some of the research that Wendy, who joined in our coal plant rediscussions a couple months ago, shared was that what it looks like is that a lot of the major actors who are acting on the retiring coal plants in the region in question are backed by private equity or, you know, sort of big finance. And that as, again, as sort of what we've been hearing about Homer City is that it's opaque process. And so how do you kind of break into that? I think one area that ReImagine Appalachia might be able to help spearhead is, you know, talking to sustainable business networks, you know, CDFIs or CDCs, the quote unquote good guys, right, of private investment who might actually be willing and more open to working alongside communities or supporting community-led or community-envisioned development, and sort of helping bridge that gap so that it's not just the big actors that already have the money and the resources who are determining the future of the local economies, but it's people working together and sort of bringing all of those resources together. I really see ReImagine Appalachia being in a position to do that. And then maybe if there's one other intersection there, it's one of the biggest pieces of the federal infrastructure funding that's still shaking out, but the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, at least as we've been told, is intended to sort of be the lever of that legislation that ensures, you know, that low income and disadvantaged communities are benefiting from all the changes that the new incentives are spurring. And so that might be an area of, you know, once those sub-grantees are identified, maybe ReImagine Appalachia kind of pulling those actors together in a summit along those lines where this is at least one topic of conversation, and sort of being able to elevate our sense of what's possible with the coal plants. I see those as potential opportunity areas if we really want to, you know, sort of assert a different tack for how these things are shaking out.
Thanks, Jared. And I'm hearing a couple of pretty helpful ideas in your comments. Two that I'll call out. One is sort of the importance of identifying actors that are present and able to engage with communities and capture community voice, and are also able to engage in sort of the financial decision making around coal plant reuse. And the second is sort of a nod towards the diversity of federal funding programs that are now available and to activities that are related to redeveloping coal sites. And we've heard about DOE options, and this is one from the EPA that is important as well. Others, we have a little bit of time left, enough for a couple more comments. So please raise your hand if you'd like to chime in. And again, this can be a reflection on the original prompt about ReImagine Appalachia's focus areas, but also I'm curious how folks see themselves engaging and participating in this work, or ways that when you hear the ideas from ReImagine Appalachia around creating this online resource, around creating a network of experts, around developing a community of practice and connection points between information and groups that need this information and can use it, how do you see yourself participating or sharing in this work? Is that clear to you? Is it hard to imagine you or your organization working here? Both are, I think, pretty helpful pieces of feedback. Tina, yes.
I would say, I mean, I think we have a lot of the pieces that people have been talking about. We have a university, it has a sustainability program. We have a public-private partnership group. That's what I'm involved in. I mean, so we have some things like that. There are some other pieces that are missing, but I feel much more hopeful. And I also have a really practical question. And I guess the last speaker, Jared, I think said CFI and some other acronym for it. I don't know what that is.
I just typed them out. Sorry, I broke one of the cardinal rules that they put up before we did the breakout.
CDFI. Okay.
I use acronyms. Forgive me.
Sweet. Thank you. That's all I needed to know.
And Tina, there are folks from Indiana County who meet with us on a fairly regular basis. So
Really?
I think that there is an existing community of practice that's at least trying to, you know, become an involved partner in what happens at Homer City.
Huh. Well, they're secret to me.
Okay. I can't think of their names off the top of my head, but let me see if I can rattle one
Okay.
out. If so, I'll message you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Jared. Other folks, and I know there's a lot of content in the chat as well. So not everyone has been able to come off mute, but people have been sharing some really helpful resources and ideas in the chat. So thank you for that.
So how will you give us the chat information? Or will you?
We'll be keep me confirmed, but I think we'll be capturing that in the notes document.
Thank you.
Briggs,
Sam, if I could just make a comment, we really talk about really develop an ecosystem, not just repurposing the site itself, but really the whole surrounding region around an ecosystem that'll help support each other all the way around. That's what's really needed if you want it to be sustainable. It's just not just one building or one small part of the facility. It's really about redoing a whole region right around that particular facility. And that facility will most likely be a coal-fired plant, will probably be the central facility, but not necessarily. That depends on what your asset assessment turns out, and really look at all your assets and how you really develop a vision. And again, you have to have a vision for where you want to head, or nobody is going to be willing to invest in it. So that's what you got to work towards, is getting a real vision for what you want to do. And it has to do all these other things we already talked about. It needs to be sustainable for the future. And not just one of these things that's going to be passed out. It's got to be able to create jobs equitably and all those kind of things as well. But that's really building an ecosystem.
Thank you, Ben. That's, I think, a pretty helpful way to kind of summarize. I know some of the information from the paper that you're working on that Bill was capturing. How do you ensure sort of the conditions of success for projects like this? Briggs, I saw you coming off mute.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for organizing this, and we are certainly very interested in understanding how we can be more helpful at the federal level. In addition to the resources, you guys have lifted up some challenges. I think one thing specifically on taking fossil infrastructure and doing manufacturing is, to me, this feels like there's an additional challenge related to the typical asset owner is not usually thinking about manufacturing. They might be thinking about an energy to energy transition, but maybe not an energy to manufacturing transition. And so particularly if we want to try to do this work in a proactive way before the closure occurs, we're working with an asset owner that isn't normally thinking about manufacturing. And so I'd be particularly curious if anybody's seen any good examples of how to break that paradigm, maybe bring people together or other mechanisms for trying to drive those kind of partnerships so that we actually have investment in a facility or at least nearby before the closure occurs.
Yeah, that's a great prompt, I think, for folks here to consider. So thank you. And I know some of the resources that the Interagency Working Group has been building and capturing have been posted in the chat as well. So I'll point people's attention to some of those too. I think we'll be pulled back to the main session in a minute or two. Anyone have a closing thought? Any other reflections? Yep. Is there in the last 50 seconds? If not, yeah, thank you so much for joining this breakout. I think there's been both a lot of great resources and also a call for the types of connection that ReImagine Appalachia is interested in engaging with and helping to facilitate over the coming year. And hopefully getting some of the existing resources into the hands of people who can use it, as well as identifying areas where new work and new research is needed. And yeah, glad everyone here is engaging, and yeah, we look forward to sort of following up with many people after the chat. I know there's a lot of energy in the space. So thank you again, and we'll see you back in the main session.
Thanks, Sam.
I did want. I had the 25th